Millions of American Christians voted for Donald Trump when he ran for president in the last election, and millions more Christians around the world rooted for him to win. Many still do root for Donald Trump. Now, why is that? Because of his personal piety? Well, of course not. Trump, to his credit, has never claimed to be personally pious, especially religious in any sense. They voted for him and they still support him because he seemed like a protector. He seemed like someone who might save them from the growing and highly aggressive agnosticism, if not atheism, of, say, the technology class or the bureaucratic class, godless nations of other religions that oppose us. Donald Trump seemed like someone who would protect Christians from that, who was committed to the free exercise of religion in this country, and who was also committed to ending abortion. Whether or not he himself opposed abortion, whether he was pro-life in any meaningful sense, didn't seem to matter. He would appoint justices that opposed abortion, that thought Roe v. Wade was unconstitutional. He did that. And that he would basically carry the flag for their issues, and that he was sympathetic to them. And they support him on that basis. Can they still support him? That's the question. And that's a question Christians should have begun to ask themselves on January 4th of this year. And that was the day that the president announced the arrest of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who was, no question, an anti-American leader and a socialist, not someone most Americans liked or really had cause to like. So the problem was not necessarily that Trump was against an anti-American leader. In fact, that was a benefit in the eyes of most of his voters. The problem was why we did it and why the president told us he did it, and that was for the oil. So in the days before that operation in early January, the president tweeted out, sent out on his Truth Social account, and also said in public, we're doing this because we want the oil, because that oil belongs to the United States. He never explained how exactly the United States would own the natural resources of a foreign country. Apparently, American oil companies helped develop the oil fields in Venezuela. Therefore, we own the oil. That was the idea, and they stole it from us. But there was no real effort to explain how that works, how that makes any sense at all. Instead, you had the president of the United States say, we need the oil. Oil's really important. True and true. Therefore, we're going to take it. And therefore, apparently, we did. In the days after that operation, the successful removal of the president of the country and the installation of his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, as president, our president, Donald Trump, held a widely publicized on-camera meeting with the heads of American oil companies and talked through how we're going to split up the natural resources of Venezuela and why this is great for America. So why should Christians have paused at exactly that moment and asked, can I still support this? Is this what I voted for? Is this what I want? Is this acceptable? And the reason is really simple, because Trump at that moment revealed that the motive was taking something that we wanted. And that's not acceptable for Christians. In fact, that's not acceptable for Americans or any civilized people, because taking other people's stuff by force cannot be allowed. In fact, preventing that is the basis of our legal code. If there's one thing that every person knows, that is, in a civilized country, you can't steal without penalty. It's not allowed. That doesn't belong to you. You can't shoplift. You can't rob banks. You can't embezzle. You can't invade countries to steal their stuff, because they're all varieties of the same theme, which is theft. And theft is wrong. It's wrong under the American legal code, but it's also wrong under the Christian legal code. Theft is wrong. It's spelled out really clearly. It's also intuitive. And here was the president saying, we're just stealing this because we can. Well, as a practical matter, that's quite a thing to say out loud, given that we know from history that the things you do will be done unto you. Once you set a standard, you will have to live by that standard. Write a law, you will be judged by that law. So if the new law is, I can take it because I want it, and I have more power than you, at some point, we can rest assured the tables will be turned, and the things that we want and cherish and have earned and that we own will be taken from us by force at the moment when some other power has more force than we do. It's really simple. It's sometimes called the law of the jungle. And it may be the law of nature, but people don't want to live under that law because it is a brutal and unforgiving law. So they create higher laws, or they appeal to the highest law of all, which is God's law, which prohibits that. So this was a profound moment in American history, probably in the history of the modern world, where the most powerful nation said, if we want it, we'll take it. No one's ever said that before. Now, they've done it under the guise of ideology. They've made up stories to hide the fact they're doing it. But to say you're doing it implicates everybody else in the crime. You can't say you didn't know. Your president just told you on television, we took out their president because we want his oil. And at that point, you're an accessory to the crime, whether you want to be or not. And it's at that point that a lot of people should have spoken up and said, I'm out. Not that I hate Trump or don't like his entire program. Lots of things about it I love. I'm grateful. I'd maybe vote for him again, but I can't support theft because it's immoral. But they didn't. Maybe some did, but certainly the leaders of the American Christian churches, by and large, said absolutely nothing. And maybe because they said nothing, this accelerated. These are the same people who sort of didn't notice somehow that on Inauguration Day, the president did not take his oath of office with his hand on the Bible. His wife stood next to him holding it. I was about 15 feet away and saw it, but he did not put his hand on the Bible. And that should have been maybe a clue that we need to pause and think about, what is this? Why wouldn't you put your hand on the Bible? If you don't believe in the Bible, you think it's just a book, there's no cost to you to putting your hand on it, just kind of following the protocol, going along with the tradition. All presidents do it. Why aren't you doing it? And you're not doing it intentionally. You're choosing not to put your hand on the Bible when you take that oath. That suggests not that you don't believe it's real, because if you didn't believe it was real, why would you care? You'd put on the costume and take it off. It doesn't matter. That suggests you know it is real and you're rejecting it intentionally. You know what you're doing and you're doing it anyway. But nobody asked questions about that either. It seemed kind of inappropriate, given the celebration then in progress, to ask, why wouldn't you put your hand on the Bible when you take the oath of office to lead our nation? But pretty much nobody did. I didn't. I'll admit that. I saw it and didn't say one word. Bothered me ever since. But right around January 4th, it became clear that maybe he didn't put his hand on the Bible because he affirmatively rejects what's inside that book. And what's inside that book are limits on human behavior. Because if there's one theme that spans all 66 books in the Christian Bible, it's that you are not God. And you cannot assume his powers. Because you don't have them. You may convince yourself you have them. You may want them. You may have been promised them. But in the end, they're not yours. And you'll never have them. And you can only destroy yourself and the people around you by pretending that you do. That is the consistent message that spans from Genesis to Revelation. And people who ignore that law are punished. Just like people who ignore gravity or freezing temperatures are punished. Because these are laws that were not created by people. They supersede people. But on January 4th, when the President of the United States told us he was stealing, that our country was stealing something that didn't belong to us, people should have piped up and said something, but they didn't. And that got us all the way to yesterday, which was Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday is not just a holy day on the Christian calendar, it is the center of the Christian calendar, it is the holiest day in Christian life. Because it's the day that Christians remember the whole point of their religion, which is not that Jesus was killed, but that he rose from the dead, that he beat death, unique in history. And this is the day that Christians celebrate his resurrection. And in this country, that celebration's been watered down effectively to candy and Easter bunnies, but globally and certainly historically, Easter is the focus. It's preceded by Holy Week and Lent, 40 days of self-denial and prayer, all leading up to yesterday, Easter morning. And for faithful Christians, it is still the biggest day of the year. And it's a day of joy. The thing every person fears most is death. We're born fearing it because we're born knowing it's coming. And Christianity, unique among religions promises victory over it. And Jesus' resurrection is proof that God can beat death because only God creates life. And so the morning of Easter is a uniquely joyful and peaceful moment. And yet that peace yesterday was shattered. That's not an overstatement. It was shattered for many observant Christians by a statement that the President of the United States put out at 8:03 a.m. Eastern time on Easter morning that said this, and we're going to read it in its entirety, not in outrage or self-righteousness, but honestly in horror. Quote, Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. 3 exclamation points. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. All caps. Praise be to Allah. President Donald J. Trump. Now, a lot of people reading that imagined, of course, this can't be real. Did the President of the United States really just write that? And it is real. It is maybe the most real thing this president has ever done, and also the most revealing. On every level, it is vile on every level. It begins with a promise to use the U.S. military, our military, to destroy civilian infrastructure in another country, which is to say to commit a war crime, a moral crime against the people of the country, whose welfare, by the way, was one of the reasons we supposedly went into this war in the first place. They're being killed by their government. We have to rescue them. And now here's our president, not even a month and a half into the conflict, which we are not winning, by the way, because the Straits of Hormuz are not open. There's one way to keep track. That's the measurement. Saying that we're going to use our military to kill the civilians of this country who didn't choose the war. They got nothing to do with it. They're like civilians everywhere. Blow up their bridges? Bridges on military bases? No, just bridges. Bridges that people cross every day to go to school and work and to worship. And yes, church, because there are over 1 million Christians in Iran. This is their Easter too. And power plants. Not the power plants attached to missile factories. Okay. But civilian power plants in a country of almost 100 million people. What happens when a modern country, and a country that has a nuclear program is a modern country, sorry, Iran is a modern country, what happens when it loses power? Well, people die. Babies connected to incubators die. People in hospitals die. And those are the first level effects. And then people begin to starve. And then you have refugee crises. People leave the cities looking for food. And yes, they move into other countries. In the region, in Europe, in the United States, you cause chaos and death, mass suffering and death when you do that. And we have done that. We have intentionally bombed civilian infrastructure in Iran. It's totally unacceptable. Not under the phony laws of some international body, but under moral law, God's law. Killing non-combatants, people who did nothing wrong, who didn't choose this war, who were just people created by God. That is immoral. That will never be moral. That can never be justified. That is always wrong. It can be expedient. We need to do this. It doesn't mean it's right. It's the most wrong thing. And we should always remember that what we do will be done to us. Live by the destruction of civilian infrastructure, live by the killing of children, the bombing of elementary schools and colleges. And you will die, and your children will die by those same things. That's just a fact. That's never not been true. We don't want it to be true. It's the last thing we want to be true, but it is nonetheless true. And everyone knows that on an animal level. You can feel that that's true. Ooh, shouldn't do that. You'll be punished for it in this life or the next, or maybe both. For the president to say that and not bother to tell us, oh, it was an accident we did this. Well, one, it makes you reassess the bombing of the girls' school attached to the IRGC naval base, where the children of Iranian military officers were incinerated in a bombing, not one, but two, a double tap. Every person has assumed that was a mistake. No American could ever believe the U.S. government would do that on purpose. I still don't believe it. But after this, you have to kind of wonder, how did that happen? Was it bad targeting, coordinates given to us, we hope, by Israel, another country? Maybe it wasn't. Who knows at this point? For the president to call for that, it's worth stopping and saying, no, this is not acceptable under any circumstances. You haven't justified it. You couldn't justify it. And it can't be done in our name. And the point, of course, is to get the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz. Well, no sane person thinks that's going to work. At which point you have to ask, why would we do it anyway? Well, there are a bunch of possible reasons, but the darkest of all is for the sake of doing it. For the sake of killing, for the sake of exercising the most obvious form of power, which is extinguishing life. That's why we're doing it. The thrill is in the killing. The power is in the killing. The exertion of force is the point. You don't want to think that. But after a message like this, what could possibly be the reason? There's nobody who thinks that if we do this, and we pray we don't, for our sake as well as the sake of non-combatant innocent Iranians, nobody thinks this is going to work. But then the tweet continues. Pardon me, the ironically named truth continues. There will be nothing like it. Open the effing strait. How dare you speak that way on Easter morning to the country? Who do you think you are? You're tweeting out the F word on Easter morning? You'll be living in hell. As if hell is a place. Hell is a condition. And this is an example of that condition. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. So obviously you're mocking the religion of Iran. Okay. If you seek a religious war, that's a good idea. But by the way, no decent person mocks other people's religions. You may have a problem with the theology. Presumably you do if it's not your religion, and you can explain what that is. But to mock other people's faith is to mock the idea of faith itself. And we should never mock that, because at its core is the acknowledgement that we are not in charge of the universe. We did not build it. We won't be here at the end of it. We can destroy life. We cannot create it because we are not God. The message of all faith at the biggest picture level is the message in our Bible, which is you are not God. And only if you think you are do you talk this way. But it's not just mockery of Islam. And no president should mock Islam. That's not your job. This is not a theocracy. We don't go to war with other theocracies to find out which theocracy is more effective. We are not a theocracy. And God willing, we never will be, because theocracies corrupt the religion. No, this is a mockery not just of Islam, it's a mockery of Christianity. To send out a tweet with the F word on Easter morning promising the murder of civilians and then saying praise be to Allah without explaining any of it, you are mocking me and every other Christian because we're Christians. Oh, I get it. We can't support that. Under no circumstances can we support that. Doesn't mean you have to hate Trump or take the opposite position on every issue from Trump. You shouldn't. A lot of his positions are the right positions, but you cannot support that. That is evil. That is an intentional desecration of beauty and truth, which is the definition of evil. And you have to ask, where does evil lead? If the core point of evil is to destroy, which it is, God creates, Satan destroys. It's dualism. When you see something of beauty being created, when you hear the truth being spoken, you are witnessing a manifestation of God's power. And when you see the opposite, you're witnessing the opposite. So where does this lead? Well, on a practical level and a spiritual level, they converge in the same place, which is the use of weapons of mass destruction. So on a practical level, on a strategic level, if you're at the Pentagon gaming this out, like how does this work? Better. But there's something else to think about, something maybe even more important than whether we have a nuclear war. What could be more important than that? Well, your soul, the way we worship God, whether we acknowledge God or not. That's more important ultimately than anything else. And you have to think through, like, could there be a spiritual component to what we're watching? Is it just a conventional escalation ladder in a badly thought out war with ill-defined goals, and we just wound up in this really tough place where we face either humiliation on the one side or a nuclear launch on the other? That's part of what it is, but could it be something bigger than that? Is it possible that what you're watching is a very stealthy yet incredibly effective attack on what, from a Christian perspective, is the true faith, belief in Jesus? Is that what really is under attack here? Maybe that's what's been under attack for a long time, maybe our whole lifetime. Maybe almost everything we see is an attack on that faith, the one faith that is always attacked, always and everywhere for 2,000 years. Many faiths have been attacked. Many religious people of different religions have been killed over the past 2,000 years. But there's been only one sustained effort to exterminate a faith, and that's the Christian faith. Could that be part of it? And is it possible that the president sees this not just in geostrategic terms, in military terms, in economic terms, got open and straight? Okay. Is it possible the president sees this in bigger terms? Sees this as the fulfillment of something or the elevation to some higher office beyond President of the United States? That's entirely possible. And that's not an attack, but it's also not a guess. Because at every turn since the inauguration last January, there have been religious leaders on the scene telling us out loud. Most of us ignored it because we're just so secular, we just sort of ignore it. Got some sleazy Southern Baptist preacher who says whatever for money. Okay, got it. We've ignored that this could actually be real. There's something going on here. And we shouldn't ignore that. We should always remember that just because we're a secular nation, have been overwhelmingly secular, maybe not coincidentally since we dropped those atom bombs 80 years ago, doesn't mean that we live in a world where everyone else is secular. And it definitely doesn't mean that the spiritual realm has been eliminated, that is not real, that the only things that matter are the things that we can see and hear and feel and taste and measure. Talk about fake. Talk about a silly religion. That's the silly religion. In real life, in the life that every person lives, no matter what your religion or lack of it, there is a daily recurring experience of the transcendent, things you cannot explain or see or touch or feel or taste or measure. That is every bit as real. In fact, it may be determinative. And maybe the most important things in your life are the things you don't fully understand. All of us know that. And so when people start making reference to mystical religious principles that we don't understand, it doesn't mean that it's fake. They may be getting it wrong, but it doesn't mean there's not something real at the center of this. Of course there is. And only a civilization as bereft of spiritual language as ours wouldn't pick up on that immediately. What do you mean, praise be to Allah? What does that mean? Why are you sending this out on Easter morning? I mean, obviously it's designed to offend and degrade and defile. Got it. But is there something else going on here? And one of the keys to this is the behavior of a woman called Paula White. In a moment, we're going to speak to a man who studied her, who went to her church yesterday, called Nathan Abfell. Fascinating conversation with him, which we just finished, where he tries to understand who are these people encouraging the president of the United States to see himself as a millennialist figure, as part of the eschatology of, like, part of the end time story. Who are these people who are encouraging the rebuilding of the third temple in Jerusalem, whatever that is? Like, what is this? Is this Christianity? Is it something else? And he knows a lot about it, and it's a fascinating conversation that I hope that you will watch. But at the center of this is the most unlikely person of all, a ludicrous figure, someone who's so absurd on one level that it's impossible to take this person seriously. That would be Paula White, the president's spiritual advisor. And because she's so self-evidently not worth taking seriously, most people don't, and they just tune it right out. Who cares what she says? What does it have to do with the economy? Oil prices, GDP, reopening the strait? I don't know. Maybe you should listen a little more carefully. So here's one example. This is something that Paula White said about the president right before this recent escalation, during Holy Week, at the White House, a gathering to which many American Protestant leaders, big ones, Franklin Graham included, were invited. And they gave a blessing to Donald Trump as he accelerated this war against the civilian population of Iran. Here's what she said about Donald Trump. Watch this.
Jesus taught us so many lessons through his death, burial, and resurrection. He showed us great leadership. Great transformation requires great sacrifice. And Mr. President, no one has paid the price like you have paid the price. It almost cost you your life. You were betrayed and arrested and falsely accused. It's a familiar pattern that our Lord and Savior showed us. But it didn't end there for him, and it didn't end there for you.
It's hard to believe that's real. That is so vile. It's such a sacrilege. Standing in front of American flags in the White House with some kind of beta evangelical leader nodding along as you liken the president of the United States to Jesus, the Christian Messiah, God in human form. How could you say something like that? How could the rest of us sit by and not protest when she said something like that? How could any Christian watch that and not feel revulsion? Well, because people didn't pay attention or they didn't think about it. Oh, it's just the praise that Trump demands. Fine. Not the first vain president, not the first vain leader, that's for certain. But to compare him or any president to Jesus has got to be a deal killer. That is the end. You cannot allow that in good faith. If you're a Christian, you have to say no to that. Doesn't matter whether you voted for Trump, campaigned for Trump across many states, defended him for 10 years, still like him, doesn't matter. You cannot compare a president, a secular president of the United States, or anybody, any human being to Jesus. Why? Well, because again, it is sacrilege prima facie, but because it distorts who Jesus is. It is a lie about Jesus. Did Jesus command the disciples to go out and kill people? Where in the New Testament is that? Well, most people probably don't even know because they don't read it. Because their understanding of Christianity comes filtered through people like Paula White and Franklin Graham and many others of varying levels of good faith or maybe entirely good faith, but they don't read it themselves. Kind of weird if you think about it. It's a great story. You don't have to believe in it to enjoy it, to learn from it, to love it, actually. And if you're a believer, you need to read it, and it's not hard to read it. By the way, it's on Amazon.com. Try this. New Living Translation, NLT. Probably the most modern colloquial English translation of the Bible. Easiest to read. It's great. It's $4.30 on Amazon delivered to your house. NLT. Just read it. Just read the 4 Gospels. You don't have to believe it. What do you think of that? What's the picture that emerges? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Just 4 stories about Jesus from slightly different perspectives. Is the man that you read about, the Messiah you read about, recognizable as you listen to these people talk about him? Does he send his disciples out to kill? Well, I'll answer the question, having just read him. No. He sends them out to be killed. He says to them, go out, tell the truth. The world will hate you for it. Take no weapon, take no food, take no money, take no talking points. I'm not even going to tell you what to say. Just tell the truth. God will speak through you. Totally unprepared. Doesn't give them a map. Doesn't give them a plan of any kind, and he gives them no defense. And he says, point blank, again and again, you could be killed for this. Probably will be. In fact, they all were. So far as we know, they were all killed. That's the Christian message. Now, you may think that that's absurd. Many have. Nietzsche was revulsed by it. Get it? But that is what Jesus said. He did not say bomb the bridges and the hospitals and the power plants to what? Bring my kingdom? No. He said just the opposite. If you want to change the world, you cannot kill. It doesn't work anyway. It never works. You have to be willing to be killed. You have to lay down your life. And that is the message. You think God couldn't come and throw the Romans out of Jerusalem? Oh, yeah. Of course. He chose the opposite. He chose to submit to them. Why? Because in that submission is victory over death. That's the true victory. That's the whole story right there. And anyone who perverts that is doing a grave crime against the faith itself, and that actually matters. You can argue about all kinds of points of doctrine and transubstantiation and a million things you can argue about, and Christians have argued about them for 2,000 years. But you can't argue that Jesus sends his people, God's people, his disciples out to kill. He sends them to do the opposite thing, to die. And they do. And the world is transformed because they did. That's the message. And anyone preaching the opposite gospel of any Christian denomination is saying something vile and dangerous and should be called out for saying it, because the message is not of conquering, it's of submission. Put your hand on the Bible when you take that oath, because in doing that, you acknowledge I am submitting to a law greater than myself. My own desire, my own whims, my will is not the final word. There is a limit to what you can do. And that limit is set not by you or any other person, but by God. That's what that means. Submit. There is time to fix this. There is time to prevent whatever is coming next, whether it's the murder of civilians and children by air, or whether it's something even worse than that. There is time to fix it. All is not lost. But the first step, and this is also the first step toward faith, is submission. There are things I want to do that I will intentionally not do. I will submit to a law higher than my own desire. That's the first step towards civilization. And it is the first and absolutely mandatory step toward averting the true disaster that is coming. And we pray that the president will take that step and that those around him will take that step, because everything hangs in the balance.